Even though the big talking points after the Belgian Grand Prix were George Russell's disqualification and also the unknown over Sergio Perez's Red Bull future for the second half of the season, which, to be honest at this point, I think it's more likely that he won't be at Red Bull for the second half of the season, to me, the biggest takeaway was yet again Lando Norris. Now this will be a bit of a different video. Some of the viewers of the channel will know that I do like to do this from time to time, just a bit of a kind of more casual, more podcast style video. Yeah, that's why it might feel a little bit different. And I just wanted to talk about Lando Norris because, to be honest, this season so far, he has been a little bit disappointing in my opinion when you consider that he's the team leader, when you consider how McLaren have improved and have given him a race-winning car in my opinion, and also the expectations I think going into the season. And now, I think I said this at the end of last year, but with where Lando was in his career and with the cars that McLaren had been able to give him, there was basically nothing more that he could prove. I mean, we had seen him have some incredible seasons, there was some great podiums, he was able to finish best of the rest in the championship a few years, and so the only box, in my opinion, that was kind of left unchecked was that if he was finally given a race-winning car, could he finally win races and do it consistently, beat the likes of Max, Lewis and Charles race after race, which is the hallmark of a great driver who could win the championship. And that is why this season has just been disappointing, because finally Lando has been put on that pedestal under that highest level of pressure, he has been given a car that can compete for race wins, and we have just seen a lot of flaws in his driving. Spa was yet another bad race where he had once again a really bad start, first of all getting jumped by Oscar and then kind of giving him too much space going into turn 1 and putting himself on the gravel by going wide, which even Lando admitted after the race basically cost him not just the race win but just the entire race in general. But even after that, Lando starting 4th and Max starting 11th should have still at least been a race where he was able to gain points on Max. And despite that, Max still managed to beat Lando and still managed to extend his lead in the championship. Now, I know the Drivers' Championship fight, so to speak, is basically non-existent. I mean, the gap is now 78 points in the Drivers, whilst the Constructors is definitely a lot more interesting, and that's obviously why Sergio Perez's future has been such a big talking point. But it just feels like back when the gap was still about 50 or 60 points between Lando and Max, given how good that McLaren is, if you did have a Lewis Hamilton, a Fernando Alonso, or even a Charles Leclerc in that situation, I think people would have a hell of a lot more belief in those drivers being able to close that gap than people ever did in Lando being able to do it. And now, when it comes to his bad starts, this is becoming a bit of a ridiculous habit and a serious weakness because whilst I get that drivers can have a bad start, anyone can have a bad day, a bad race, or a bad start, he is seriously starting to worry me because in Russia 21 he lost it to Sainz, in the sprint in Sao Paulo in 23 he lost it straight away to Max, obviously in the sprint in China this year he lost it straight away to Lewis into turn 1, then in Spain he got jumped by both George and Max, and then in Hungary in 2024 he also lost it to Oscar Piastri, which is kind of what set Oscar up to win that race. And now, there's absolutely no way that this is just a coincidence, because 5 times is not a coincidence, it's a habit. And there's just no way that the likes of Hamilton or Verstappen, who we know are capable of reeling off just pole position after pole position and basically controlling races from start to finish, there's no way they'd lose out on pole position at the end of lap 1 5 times in a row. So this is a problem with Lando, and I think for me, it's a question of why is it happening? Now, I think the two main factors are pressure and technique. In general, I think this season we have seen that Lando just hasn't been able to deal with pressure. That pressure at the front of the grid of being able to win races and everyone expecting you to be able to win races from pole position, Lando has not coped with it very well. He seems to be very defensive. I think he's always worried at the beginning of races that he's always going to get jumped. So he's always on the defensive, always already pointing his car in trying to block off the car that he's trying to defend from, instead of being on the attacking and nailing that start in the way that we've seen other drivers been able to do. Now, there's also obviously a technique aspect to all of this as well. I'm sure there's a technical aspect to it as well because the starts in Formula 1 are very complicated procedures. There's obviously a paddle sequence, there's also an engine mapping sequence as well, so there's very specific things that the team and drivers have to do. So there's no doubt that maybe McLaren also can help Lando out and kind of work with him a little bit, but this is something he needs to work on during the summer break, whether it's dealing with pressure, whether it's fine-tuning things with McLaren, because at the moment it's just not good enough. It kind of looks embarrassing, especially when you kind of compare him to the absolute best drivers on the grid, and this is becoming a seriously bad habit. I think this season has also opened up Lando to a little bit of ridicule, to be honest, because it's something that someone actually mentioned in the comments to one of my videos, that in the past, Lando has actually been quite chirpy about his comments towards Lewis and Max, about how they always have the fastest car and how he's always been playing this kind of underdog card that just, wait till I have a car as quick as you and I'll be able to do it. I mean, obviously we even saw in the cooldown room in Hungary, which I thought was a really strange interaction. Lewis, I think, was just complimenting McLaren, kind of complimenting how fast their car is. And again, Lando just had like a little comment about, well, look how fast your car was 7 years ago. And of course, the biggest one I think some of you might remember is that when Lewis Hamilton beat Michael Schumacher's record by taking his 92nd Grand Prix win, and obviously a record-holding 92nd Grand Prix win at the time, Lando, after the race, when asked about it, said, "It doesn't mean anything to me, really. He is in a car which should be winning every race, basically." I think this season he's actually been humbled a little bit, because I think Lando and a lot of fans in general are realizing it is not as easy as people think it is to win Formula 1 Grand Prix. I think what's quite interesting is the comparison between Lando and Charles Leclerc. Now, this is something that I've actually been called out on a few times, both in comments and also on Instagram, in terms of how highly I rate Charles Leclerc. Because I do put Leclerc in that kind of Lewis and Max and Fernando category, despite the fact that he is not a championship winner. And now, the reason I do this is because, in my opinion, even though Leclerc now is a far better driver to the one that he was in 2022, so you kind of have to take that into account, during that early part of 2022 when Leclerc had an equally as good a car as Lando has had over the past 7 or 8 races, he actually gave me the belief that he could beat Max Verstappen. There were weekends where Charles was just the better driver than Max, outqualified him, outraced him, even overtook him for the win multiple times, like in Bahrain and even Austria that year as well. He gave me the type of belief that he could beat Max Verstappen that I have never had at any point this season with Lando Norris. Lando hasn't been able to win from pole position. Even if he's started right behind Max, he hasn't been able to overtake him or jump him at the line or outrace him over the course of the race. And that is the difference between Lando Norris and Leclerc. No one at any point this season has really believed that Lando could take the championship away from Max Verstappen, whilst with Leclerc, he showed us signs that he was more than capable of beating Max and being the world champion. And now it's important to remember that Lando is going to continue developing in the future. I think it would be naive to believe that this is the driver that Lando is going to be for the rest of his career, because the experience that he is having this year and the pain that he is going through this year, which I can see after every single race, it is going to make him a better driver. McLaren also, I think, are going to improve as a team, because I really don't want to make it sound as if I'm pinning everything on Lando Norris, because we all know McLaren have some serious issues on the communication side, definitely on the strategy side. They have left results on the table for both of their drivers. But the problem for Lando and also McLaren in a way is that Oscar Piastri is developing at such a fast rate that there is every chance that going into next year, he might be the favourite for the championship over Lando. Or whilst I'm not saying that Oscar is a better driver than Lando right now, because he definitely still needs to improve on a few things, like he made a few mistakes, for example, in Hungary when he was leading, and also in qualifying. Even though Lando has kind of dominated Oscar in terms of their head-to-heads, they have been one of the closest driver lineups on the grid in terms of their average time. I have seen better moments from Oscar Piastri that make me believe that he could be a champion of the future. I mean, some of the race pace in Silverstone and even in Spa, for example, last time out, I mean, he was arguably the quickest car on the track, and had it not been so difficult to overtake, he potentially could have won that race. And then in Hungary, I just thought the way he won that race, despite the controversy at the end, jumping Lando at the beginning of the race, doing what Lando hasn't proven that he can do, that to me was a more convincing performance when it comes to fighting for a win than anything I have seen from Lando so far. I think that this sets up a really strange situation and kind of dilemma for McLaren, because it really does seem that Oscar is just getting better and better, more comfortable racing at the front, potentially more comfortable at winning races, whilst Lando is definitely going through a bit of a, I think, confidence problem. The pace is there in both of the drivers, it's not as if they're not quick enough, but it just seems that Oscar has that confidence and especially that mentality that I really like. I mean, he just seems like he's not rattled by anyone, whilst Lando to me definitely seems like a driver who has this kind of weight of the world on his shoulders. Now, how will McLaren handle that if there does come a point where perhaps Oscar even starts to outperform Lando on quite a consistent basis, will be very interesting to see, because they're going to have to do a bit of emotional management with Lando Norris. He is still technically their number one driver, the experienced driver of that team, and you don't want him to lose confidence by the fact that his younger teammate might start to beat him sooner rather than later. And now, it's not as if we've never seen a younger driver kind of come into a team and start beating the older driver. But usually under those circumstances, it's when the older driver is already a multiple-time race winner and maybe even a world champion. So all of this is happening on a really strange timeline, because whilst Lando has finally been given the car that he's been asking for, he seems to be hitting a bit of a ceiling both in his own performances. I think he's under-delivering relative to the talent that he has, and clearly he's feeling the pressure, whilst his younger teammate in only his second season already being put in this kind of massive pressurized situation where he's expected to win races, just seems to be delivering a lot more. And now, were Oscar to overtake Lando and basically supersede him at the team, I think what would be very interesting to see is, would we start to see a rift forming between Lando and McLaren? Now, what impact would that have on his future at the team as well? I think could be quite an interesting one, because we know that Max might be potentially leaving Red Bull for Mercedes in 2026. Could that open up a space for Lando if, for example, Oscar Piastri wins the championship next year? So all of these permutations I think are on the table. And at this moment, Lando Norris to me hasn't shown in 6 seasons that he's capable of being a consistent race winner, let alone a championship contender, whilst with Oscar, we are starting to see those kind of little moments that he could be their best championship contender for 2025. So all of these things are very interesting, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts on it in the comments box below. Now, if you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would be massively appreciated. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.